Juneteenth. And what's Juneteenth about? Yeah, so I've been living in this country for 21 years now, almost. In a few weeks, actually in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, I'm here 21 years, which is the most surprising to myself. Not planned. And for the longest time, I didn't even know Juneteenth existed. I think I maybe had just heard it a few times, and I thought, that's a weird word. What's that about? And I think really it only came more to my awareness over the last few years. And thinking, I don't really know what that is. And then guess what? I mean, I don't know if I can make the assumption that every one of you knows what that is. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. You probably didn't learn that in school. Right? Because when you were in school, that wasn't a holiday, yeah? And I have asked like several of my like US-born friends, and they didn't know what it was. So I'll do a little, education here. So always the educator, just in case you're interested. And this is really relevant to our practice, of course. So this is from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And so they're writing about this. They say, on Freedom's Eve, on the eve of January 1st, 1863, the first watch night services took place. On that night, enslaved and free African Americans gathered in churches and private homes all across the country, awaiting news that the Emancipation Proclamation had taken effect. At the stroke of midnight, prayers were answered as all enslaved people in Confederate states were declared legally free. Union soldiers, many of whom were Black, marched onto plantations and across cities in the South, reading small copies of the Emancipation Proclamation, spreading the news of freedom in Confederate states. Only through the 13th Amendment did emancipation end slavery throughout the United States. But not everyone in Confederate territory would immediately be free. Even though the Emancipation Proclamation was made effective in 1863, it was not implemented in places still under Confederate control. As a result, the westernmost Confederate state of Texas, enslaved people would not be free until much later. Freedom finally came on June 19th, 1865, so more than 2 years later, when some 2,000 Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas. The Army announced that the more than 250,000 enslaved Black people in the state were free by executive decree. This day came to be known as Juneteenth by the newly freed people in Texas. So, and then there was this interesting thing that, again, like, did you always know about Juneteenth? Do you grow up here learning about that? Yeah, so it's like you heard about it, right? And I even like, I mean, I have Black friends, they said like they didn't know it because it was just something for a long time that was celebrated in Texas, but in the rest of the US, it wasn't really known at all. And then what happened was that, so after George Floyd was murdered, yeah, so there was, I mean, we all know what happened afterwards, and it felt really important that there was, like what's a good word, like a symbol of just like we need to make something very clear and obvious that the right for freedom is important and that we really acknowledge that yes, slavery did happen in this country. And the wealth and the richness of this country is to a big degree based on slavery. And what was very interesting that Juneteenth was then made a federal holiday in 2021. So very quickly, a year after, yeah? So after it being like around for like over 100 years. And then it was very interesting, I don't know if you know this, but it took the civil rights movement over 20 years after Martin Luther King was assassinated to make MLK Day a national holiday. It was a huge fight. It was a huge fight to make his birthday a national holiday. And what was very interesting, I was looking into this, you might know this, but a big part of that was Stevie Wonder's song, Happy Birthday. Did you know that? That Happy Birthday was actually about Martin Luther King's birthday and really saying like, this needs to be a national holiday. I didn't know this. Of course, being in Germany, we were just all like, happy birthday to you. Right? We thought, oh, great, right? We would sing that on birthday parties, right? And so it's just like, oh, the sweet ignorance of that. So, and this is from Barack Obama, and he said, so Juneteenth has never been a celebration of victory or an acceptance of the way things are. It's a celebration of progress. It's an affirmation that despite the most painful parts of our history, change is possible, and there's still so much work to do. And so, why is this also really relevant apart from this is such a huge part of the US history? Because it's about freedom. It's about freedom, yeah? And for us, right, so this practice is about freedom. And this is what like my reflection was about for you, right? This asking yourself the question, do you feel internally more free? Yeah, and then when we feel internal through this practice, and then as we're practicing this, what happens, because of course, like we practice not in a vacuum, but we practice in a society where all these things are going on and where we are needed to do things, yeah? Which again, like when are we most likely to actually act from a place of really choice and wisdom and integrity instead of just feeling overwhelmed and shutting down. Yeah. I was just having a moment like, so for me, like, I don't know, being European, like, so the election in the European Parliament where like the rights got like huge wins that completely overwhelmed me, right? So I totally went into overwhelm. And you can maybe think about like, when did you go into overwhelm when you were looking at the news, right? So there's so many, like every day, yeah? No, seriously, right? And so how are we holding that? Yeah, so how are we holding that? Because I think we do want to show up, right? We do want to be available. We do want to take action and not just withdraw and pretend nothing is going on. And so what can we do, or how can we use these practices of freedom, of choice, which again, for me, again, has so much to do with regulating our nervous system, yeah? Just noticing, like, I think just noticing, like, oh, I feel completely overwhelmed right now, and I can't do anything in this state. That is really an important step, yeah? Because we're overwhelmed anyways. And we can change something that we're not aware of, yeah? So we can use our practice. And this is why I think like what is so amazing really about mindfulness is that mindfulness is responsive. Yeah, so like when we're sitting in a meditation, and this is why one of the reasons why I think like these long meditations are so important, because it's not just a quick 10-minute feel good. Yeah, where I can kind of surf around my feelings of anxiety or discomfort or overwhelm, like what's going on. Because as I'm sitting longer, it's more likely that I will go through all kinds of things, yeah, or things will catch up with me. Yeah, I might sit there and thinking like, whoa, that conversation that I had at work today, that did affect me. That actually, I'm still kind of a little bit shaken. I didn't even know that before I was sitting down and meditate because I'm all fine, right? Yeah, and some parts might feel that way, but others not. And how do I know that? And then to ask the question, like, what do I need? Yeah, what is helpful? And then we come to this like interesting place. I was actually talking with a friend about that earlier today, of like, this practice is really about experiencing all of it. Yeah, so sometimes it's like, there can be like a tendency like for, or this is also a sign of a dysregulated nervous system, is that we like move into black or white thinking, either or. Yeah, we don't see choices. We don't see that there might be more than one right way. Yeah, the other person might also be right. The other person might also, or the other opinion might also have a point. Yeah, and I've heard teachers say that actually the capacity to hold complexity and even paradox is a sign of maturing of wisdom, or a sign of maturing of our practice. And it is not like, oh, everybody is right, it doesn't matter. That's not what we're talking about. But really like we're holding. Yeah, have you had that experience that you from like just like, oh, this is just right? And often the stance of like, I'm right, you're wrong. If you think about that, what's the energy that lies behind that? It's fight or flight, isn't it? Yeah. Like even to the point of like when we think about, like we're talking in this practice so much about the judgmental mind. Yeah, we notice, oh, mind is judging, mind is judging. If you think about that, that's a sign of a dysregulated nervous system, right? Even on a very small basis. Yeah. So maybe not a dysregulated nervous system, but dysregulated nervous system. Yeah? But you know what I mean? Because have you noticed that if you are, again, you feel more relaxed, you feel more at ease, you feel more safe, have you noticed that the judgmental mind minds their own business? Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing sometimes, yeah? So again, like, how am I relating to things? And I think, so the black and white is like often like, also is like, am I allowed to feel joyful and happy when so many people are suffering or struggling? Yeah, so that's a big question. Anybody else had that question? Or you wonder at times, right? Yeah, right? So what I find is that actually growing our capacity to hold both makes us, right? So we're able to also really cultivate joy and cultivate love, cultivate connection, cultivate compassion, yeah? That it actually makes us more able to be with what is hard and what is painful. Yeah, and there's almost like I'm blanking on her name right now. I have to look that up. I wrote about it like when the war in Gaza in Israel first started. But there is an organization of bereaved families that works. So that's a group of Israelis and Palestinians who have worked for 20 years together, right? Who all have lost children mostly, or like close family members through the conflict, which wasn't new. And so and I took that from an interview that the Israeli mother had with Christiane Anampour, and she taught, and I think they had several interviews, and her partner, the Palestinian father, was also zoomed in at some point. But basically what she said is like, this is so painful and this is so absurd, this whole thing, that if we wouldn't just laugh together, yeah, and go out and just like after having sessions where so what they do is they go into schools, like both, like some Israeli parent and a Palestinian parent, and they go into schools and they say like, look, we're parents, yeah, so the loss of a child is a loss of a child, and it doesn't matter like what your background is, yeah. So they work together, and they've become really close friends, of course, over the years, and they have a lot of parents in their system, but these two are the leaders of that organization. And she said, it's like, we need to really laugh it off, otherwise we would go crazy. And for me, that was such a reminder of, yeah, like, it's both, yeah? And if we can't hold also the joy, if we can't hold also the lightness, which is also there all the time, of course, then we burn out. And then we go into shutdown and we go into overwhelm, yeah? And so all of the, like what we do in communities, like the singing, the dancing, the storytelling, if you think about that, those things have always been tools of community regulation, yeah? So how, again, like if you think about it, humming, singing, dancing are all nervous system regulation tools. Shaking, yeah? Crying together. All of these things help us. And this is what animals do if you look at it, yeah? So how do animals come out of a stress response? When they're really like scared or like barely escape death, they shake. Have you seen that? Maybe seen that on social media videos, right? So there's like, and then I was, somebody in a class recently shared, she said like, oh, that is what happened. I hit a cat accidentally and I was so afraid, and I stopped the car and I got out and I first thought she was dead, and I looked at her for like a minute or two, and then she started to shake and I thought she had seizures. And then she just stood up and ran away. Yeah, so that's what's built into our nervous system, yeah, for closing these stress loops. Yeah, because none of this is new. None of this is new. Like we actually evolved over the thousands and thousands and thousands of years, yeah, from having to have a nervous system that needed to be able to move through something that's life-threatening. And we have that. But I think we're not really using it in the way that we could use it, right? So, and then what we're coming back to really is, so I love the Buddha. So it's funny, I just pull back the curtain a little bit. So I have a part that says like, yeah, now you bring in a Buddha quote because we're in a Buddhist center. After you're talking about the nervous system again the entire time, it's just like, okay, so here is what I love about the Buddha, which I actually really do, and I find this really relevant. So, because what the Buddha said is like, just like the great ocean has but one taste, the taste of salt, so like my teachings have but one taste, the taste of freedom. Yeah? And I just have to say that for me, that is one of the reasons why I'm here, why I'm still here. So I started practicing this when I was 19. So I've been like with it, weaving with the practices for a long time. And it feels like it is, Trudy Goodman, our founder, she often talks about her trust fund. Yeah. So do you know the story about Trudy's trust fund? No? Okay. Love this story. So when she came to LA, she didn't know anybody, but she was a Zen teacher before she came here, and then she got divorced and she moved here because her mom and her daughter and then grandchildren, they were here. And then so she started a tiny sitting group in a first in an apartment and then over at LMU. Anybody has been over to LMU here? Yes, yes, some people, great. And then so she started to talk about her trust fund. And being in LA, people think trust fund, right? So what do you think being in LA is a trust fund? Yeah, right? You earn, or not earn, like you inherit a lot of money, kind of, yeah? Or you, for whatever reason, but mostly it's like your parents made money and then you get, like you have a trust fund, which makes you kind of carefree, right? Cared for, whatever. But what she meant is that the Dharma is her trust fund. And because she said, with these practices, and I totally agree with that, is with these practices, because life will, like, Sherry said that earlier, like, we have no idea what's going to happen. We have no idea what's going to happen with ourselves, with our loved ones, with the world right now. That's like what we're all feeling, yeah? Like the uncertainty and the anxiety around that. We don't know. So how are we going to handle that? How are we going to live with that? Yeah, through these practices. Yeah, in a way, or in a world where life is uncertain, and it always was. Yeah, we just think that we feel that more acutely right now. Is so what helps us? What helps us to stay sane and to stay embodied and to regulate ourselves back out of being dysregulated? Yeah. And for me, the practices and some physiology. Sorry, that's just my background. I just love talking about the nervous system. Yeah, so that helps us, or that helps me. Is that true for other people in here? Like trusting this, or trusting it more, or wanting to trust it more, being in the process of trying things on, yeah? Right? And this is also what the Buddha said, is like, please don't just believe it just because I say it or any authority says it. But trust it, try it and see if it works. I love that invitation, yeah? Because again, that gives so much agency to us as a practitioner. It's like, yeah, okay, I'll try that. I'll try that. And I feel like I've been doing that, like my entire adult life, to try that. So like, oh yeah, that works. Okay, I can trust that. And then what happens is over the years is the trust grows. The trust grows. Yeah, and then of course, as I'm getting older, yeah, so there, like it's inevitable, there will be more stuff coming up. Yeah, as time passes, as we get older, as the body is aging, as the bodies of the people we love are aging, right? So, and then we have this, yeah? And of course, we also know that a lot of people come in when a crisis hits, because what they see is like, I don't have the tools to deal with this, yeah? Because we haven't been taught. Because we're not doing the like sitting around the fire and crying and dancing and singing together. We're not doing that anymore. So in a way, we have to find other ways how we can do that. And part of that is also like what we're doing here, yeah, that we're coming together. It makes a difference, doesn't it? Especially in person. It's so nice, like real people, right? So, yeah. Okay, so that was my little Juneteenth and freedom and nervous system regulation talk.